Okay, this is something Barbara and Carol should recognize. This is Connie Loosely's presentation to the children in our area. Connie teaches them about Miwok days. And then she teaches them about Rancho days, and then she teaches Pioneer days. But this time she's just kind of focusing on Miwoks, and the place where she delivers this is in Janet's Miwok village that she's constructed. That's way to the left. What you see in the background is Janet's community garden that runs along the creek in Lafayette. And you see Barbara and Carol, who are here today, and me and I kind of celebrating and giving Connie a luncheon for her volunteering and teaching third graders in the Lafayette schools. After she's taught our kids for as they were growing up, she's not teaching Indian Valley kids anymore. So that is the creation myth of the Miwok Indians. But guess what? You see this creation, turtles on top of turtles all the way down. Have you all heard that phrase? It's popping up more and more now in magazines and stuff. Turtles all the way down. It just refers to an infinite regression of an idea. And the Miwoks were not alone in imagining their creation myth was based on turtles. There's been the idea of a world turtle that supports a flat earth on its back for a long time in other cultures. Go figure. And here you see a statue of progressively enlarging turtles, explaining, well, what's that turtle that created our world resting on? Well, that's another turtle, and it's another turtle. And it's not just turtles. There's elephants got into the act. There are a number of authors in the 17th and 18th century, and a Hindu source quoted by a Jesuit all the way back to the 1500s, or 1600s, excuse me. So this idea is interesting, and I remember it in Buddhism as well. And I forget what airport I saw it. I went, of course, to my Google today to try to find what airport in Asia has many more turtles. Trying to show a sort of cosmic. Are you plugged in?
No, you got it. Yes.
Sorry. A cosmic infinity. And so there you go. William James referred to the fable and the elephant and the tortoise several times. So we got an American stamp of approval. And now GPT is somehow involved. Yes, I think. It could have been. I just can't remember. But maybe I'll go back and search specifically for given all the airports we've been through. So that's my light note, and making connections between our local Miwoks and the cosmic Buddhism satisfies me. The other department of good news that satisfies me is what's happened in Northern Ireland. this is particularly interesting to me because my middle name, McNeil, I've identified as Northern Irish of the Presbyterian variety. And Aiko and I went to Belfast to try to trace my roots back. We've gone all the way back to 1749, and we can't go back any further than that because in the revolt and protests in 1916, the post office was burnt down in Dublin. Apparently, that had a lot of genealogy records. At least that's what I was told when we hit the wall in Belfast. And so what we're seeing there is the two political parties coming together. And look what? They're led by two women. And they're saying warm words. It's The Economist invites us to imagine if Biden and Trump suddenly started working in harmony. It's been like that. Part of it is Sinn Féin, who represent the Catholics in both North and South. They won the last election for the first time. Now, everybody's been knowing the demography of the situation in Northern Ireland, and it was inevitable. So the moment didn't come as a surprise to anybody. But for the first time, you have a Catholic who is now the first minister. And so, in that great Easter Compromise in the late 90s, where we figured out a breakthrough and got them to sit down together and got the the Irish Republican Army to sit down with the Protestant Presbyterian faction. Ian Paisley, he was as nationalist as you could get, and they figured out a way to get those two to sit down together. And so here they are, and you've got the unionists. That means they want a union with Britain. So they're the Presbyterians, good-naturedly trying a Gaelic sport. Gaelic is a word for the original Irish, adopted by the St. Mary's sports teams, by the way. And one of their mottos is "God is a Gael." And so they're making nice. And what's been the most recent problem? Well, Brexit. So the great thing about, and we talked about this last week, the hope for the world is a ever-growing organization of regional commonwealths like the EU. And as we said last week, like the United States itself, right? We're 11 nations, according to Woodard, or 9 nations, according to Garreau. And we've figured out a way to live together, barely at the moment. But the great thing that finally solved the conflict between Northern Ireland Presbyterians and Southern Ireland Catholics was the umbrella of the EU. When that umbrella came up, they were both under the same umbrella, and all of a sudden they could look to Brussels and not keep fighting each other. With Brexit, everybody knew it was going to happen. That was one of the worst things about Brexit. Everybody knew what would happen, and it did. Just great discord. Yes, Bob.
I just want to this is an incredibly complex subject right now and very current. But I just want to go back to something more historical, which is Irish sport, and in particular to rugby. There is an annual competition called the Six Nations. It used to be Five Nations. And there is an Irish team, and has been since 1897 or 1900 something. And in spite of the split up of Ireland into the Republic and into Ulster, when was that, 1921?
Yeah, after the Civil War.
The national Irish team has continued to this day. So when Ireland plays England, it is a team comprised of players from both the North and the South. And it never got interrupted. I mean, it's on the subject again of sport, and you saw the two leaders indulging in a little bit of sport just before.
Yeah, curling.
And the other day, the weekend, the Six Nations tournament goes on for 6 weekends actually, and this last weekend, Ireland played France. I think it was this weekend, and the French commentator made a cardinal error by referring to the Irish team as La République d'Irlande, which the team is not the Republic of Ireland. It is just Ireland. Very few people know that. And it's one of the immense complications of political divisions and subdivisions of those tiny islands stuck out on various rocks in the North Sea, that apparently not even the French knew who they were playing. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Interesting.
Oh, one more comment, that when the British team goes on international tour and plays Australia or New Zealand, the team is a combined Irish and UK or British team. So there you are. All that occurred all during the Troubles as well. Okay, now I will finish.
Well, just to add to the confusion, wasn't there another rugby tournament a few weeks ago where Ireland lost to New Zealand? That was a different rugby?
I think, well, I'm not an expert on the scheduling of rugby.
There's rugby rules and there's rugby.
Yes, there's rugby union and rugby league, and then there's Aussie rules and so on. I'm talking of rugby union, and the word union, I suppose, is quite appropriate in this case.
Yeah, talking about politics and rugby, have you all, I hope you have, seen the movie Invictus? It's about when Nelson Mandela was the head of government in South Africa, and there was a rugby team that was white, that was acknowledged to be one of the best rugby teams. It seems like it was the name of
Springbok.
Thank you, Springbok. And so he got all the blacks, and he said, "Come on, you gotta root for the Springboks," even though for the longest time they were the mascot of the apartheid government. And they did, and to make it even sweeter, I think the championship was in Cape Town, and this movie was about that championship. I think Morgan Freeman played Mandela, and who was their opponent but the New Zealand team, right, in the final match. And the New Zealand team does that haka chant, which is that Polynesian
Maori?
The Maori or Polynesians. But you'll find the haka chant in all over. But the New Zealand version of it is Maori, and they do that chant. And I don't know if you've seen the famous picture with Queen Elizabeth. At the end of that chant, the leader sticks out his tongue and puts his face right up to the person that it's aimed at. And that's how it ended. And they got a picture of that with Queen Elizabeth. Well, the history that we've lived through, that's nice to be with you all, and we can do a little bit of deeper dive on more superficial things. But it's a great movie. Matt Damon plays the captain of what was it?
Springboks.
Springboks. Okay, so here the after Brexit, well, wait a minute. Now Britain is no longer part of the EU, so there's got to be import duties and export duties. You're not going to have free trade. That was the whole part of the EU agreement, and Britain checked out. So now the EU all of a sudden has to do customs on goods made in Great Britain. Well, in the old days, before the Good Friday Agreement, there was a hard border here and a hard border where customs was set up. The great thing about the everybody joining EU was customs was no longer an issue, and the customs border went away, and that facilitated the whole idea of there even being a border. But now, with the reintroduction of Brexit, they had to have some kind of customs, but nobody wanted to reestablish a hard border here because it was going to be political violence, turtles all the way down. And then they came up with Boris Johnson and the EU negotiated this line in the Irish Sea that all of a sudden made, and functionally, at least in terms of trade, Northern Ireland part of all of Ireland. And the Unionists went crazy, and they walked away from government. Recently, they've come up with a compromise. So there's still a soft border here, but they've introduced customs on some goods. I forget what exactly the goods are. So it's kind of a compromise. The goods that need to have customs put on it, otherwise the idea of trade of a trade border accounts for nothing. So it's a compromise customs border here. People still can go across, but if you're going to move certain kind of goods off, you have to declare it and go through customs, and it weakens this border, which had made the Unionists apoplectic, because it implied that Ireland was just a unified. So this is an issue I've struggled with a long time. And the great thing about teaching is when I'm forced to explain it to other people, I finally understand it myself. I don't know if you do, but I understand it better. And so here's a truism. A generation ago, it would be hard to imagine the two leaders, O'Neill and Little Pengelly, working together. But it's gotten to the point where one of the hardcore Unionists, he'd always opposed teaching Gaelic in schools in any way, shape, or form. Well, now he's the education minister, and he spoke a few words of Gaelic at a school, which is something like you would have never seen before. And Miss O'Neill stood up for a rendition of "God Save the King" at a football match. Maybe Bob, it was one of the football matches you were alluding to. But you know,
It wasn't. That wouldn't have been a Northern Ireland. No, this is soccer. As I was mentioning,
oh, okay,
rugby,
yeah, we slipped into football. Yeah, go ahead.
rugby has not recognized the Civil War or the split up of the island of Ireland, but soccer did.
Okay, yeah, you that's the point you were making. Sorry. Okay, thank you. Anyway, so they still have a lot of hard work to do and hard decisions, but it's a bit of good news. So back to Sarah. I acknowledge there are loose strands, Truman and the Saudi dynasty. We'll come back to that at another time, perhaps, when there's a development in the Middle East. There certainly is not now. There was a recent conference, sponsored by the Commonwealth Club, and it was on the environment, and it was interesting. A statement of humility, which I think is a privileged person for almost all of my life, that those of us that have had that good fortune need some humility. And instead of saying the Native Americans need a seat at the table, they say they should build the table. I thought that was an interesting twist, and it just basically leads to even harder questions in the environment, that a hunter-gatherer lifestyle might have been better when it came to global warming. And just to get us back where we started with the Miwoks and the way they were able to live off the land, maybe there's a lesson there for us. Because when the Spanish invaders came, they could not live off the land. They couldn't figure a way to live off the land at all. So what they did was to bring in cows, and I'm going to talk about that more in just a second. We started off this by looking at the cancellation of Junipero Serra, really certainly in the state, but also in the nation, but not in Washington, D.C., where he still stands as California's one of two representatives of California in the Statuary Hall. The other one is Ronald Reagan. And so I decided to ask GPT 3.5 what it thought of Sarah's motivation. And here's what it spit out. It's never anything definitive with GPT, but it allows you to at least understand what the issues are. And their conclusion was his motivation would have been almost all religious, and his commitment to spreading Catholicism, which we saw when he was in training in Mallorca. You remember Teresa of Agreda, one of his heroes. She was capable of bilocation. That's the kind of thing that they believed at the time, that a person can be two places at once. And he believed that the benefit to Native Americans would be that when they died, their souls would go to heaven for eternity. I mean, that's what he believed. That was his motivation. And certainly he recognized his duty to serve the Spanish Empire as well, but he was primarily serving his idea of God. And whether that's worthy of sainthood or not, as a non-Catholic, it's not up to me. So there you go. I'll pause a second if anybody wants to insert a thought before we get to the disaster on the beach.
John, the one thing I would say is the population of California. My understanding is when the Spaniards got here, there were somewhere north of 100,000 native people, right?
Yeah, maybe
okay.
as high as 300,000.
Okay, 100 to 300.
Yeah,
we now have 35 million, which is 100 times as many.
yeah.
Right, just for perspective.
Yeah, thank you, David. So the disaster on the beach in San Diego. Let's review this the Sacred Expedition. The Sacred Expedition, you'll remember, was cracked up to be not so much religious by the king. His main idea was it was to hold the Russians in check from coming down. So the previous slide alluded to the goals of the Spanish Empire, and that was certainly the goal of the non-church, of the secular goal. The Sacred Expedition itself was complicated. It was going to have originally 5 prongs. So 3 were going to be on sea and 2 were going to be on land. And Portola was put in charge of the whole operation, uniting land and sea. It was also divided into secular and religious, and Serra was to lead the missionaries. The ships were strategically used to keep everybody supplied from the sea, so they could shuttle goods back and forth. Yes, Aiko.
So did the church put up any money for this stuff? Because obviously the country of Spain put up a lot of money.
Well, I'm pretty sure the church and the government were united. The only thing at that time was the Jesuits, you'll remember, and it was because the Jesuits were semi-independent and really seen as an arm of the Vatican. That's what led the government to throw the Jesuits out and put the Franciscans in, because they were loyal to the government. And I mean, the other fascinating split that we have to keep in mind at the time was between the Enlightenment thinking, rational thinking, and religious thought, theology. And you'll remember that when we talked about Father Kino, who was a Jesuit, who had done all the work first in Baja after doing miracles for the economy of northern Mexico. He couldn't do as much with Baja because of the land, the water supply. But he was, you'll remember, solidly Enlightenment. He was a part of and the Jesuits were very scientific. and we see it when they visited the Orient. They were really good about spreading Western technology and vice versa, spreading Asian technology back to Europe. The Franciscans, you know, our image of the Franciscans, oh, St. Francis, a hippie. But no, by this time, the Franciscans were extremely conservative, and representing now. Right now, Pope Francis is not that, but at the time, the Franciscans certainly were. And I think they were in the pocket of the government. They were hand in glove. All right. So 3 ships. It became very simple quite quickly. One of the ships disappeared from San Blas and was never seen again. So that brings us down to 4 prongs, 2 by sea, 2 by land. And we'll start with the ships first. They reached San Diego first, but only after almost dying, each one of them in a separate way. And I nicknamed them so we don't have to memorize names. The shore hugger and the current catcher. And the current is the California current. And the idea was to sail west and then catch the circular current that would eventually dump you off in San Diego. And immediately they had problems because of a storm. And so all of a sudden they're out of water because their water caskets had failed and busted open. But guess what? The same thing happened to shore hugger. And that just, they doubled down on hugging the shore because they had to stop periodically to try to find water. And that made them very slow. So the current catcher got to San Diego, even though it sailed much further, faster. But the shore hugger was going against the California current the whole way. And finally arrived. And it carried the soldiers, the security against whether the tribes would be hostile or not, and they were hostile, as we'll see. So I said all this. They got fresh water, but like in a place like Ensenada, it would be contaminated. So it arrived very late, 3 weeks behind. And by the time it got there, everybody had scurvy, and they either had typhus or typhoid. I think it was typhus because one of the articles mentioned insect bites. But they were dying left and right. And so the current catcher got there and had to wait. And they had scurvy, and they were parched too. They finally stopped at an island that had fresh water. And 2 of their crew had actually died, and only 7 by the end were fit. So you combine those 2 crews together, 120, only 16 were fit by the time that they both reached San Diego shore. They were ailing, so they took down one of the sails and made a tent hospital on the beach, where it said 3 men died every day. And I suspect it was typhus. And there is a memorial called Dead Man's Point, right at the north end of San Diego Harbor. Fajas, who was a captain, and he's gonna appear again and again, and we've already met him when we did the history of Martinez. So, spoiler alert, he survives and gets all the way to San Francisco Bay, where he circumnavigates all around the area and stops off at Martinez along the way. David Clinic had a reference about him doing that. He contributed to me. And so Fajas finally is led to a river 3 miles away. And I've lived in San Diego, and there's no big rivers roaring through. But there are a lot of small rivers and creeks. And ominous, while these sick people were lying on the beach under a sail serving as a tent, there was an earthquake. And then there was an eclipse. I think we have an eclipse coming up soon. So this is another view of Dead Man's Point. And how far do the people walking? How far did they have to walk? Some of them had mules. The soldiers had horses. And this gives you some idea. They started from Loreto. And they'd come over from the mainland, San Blas, by ship. And it's quite a ways, 1,147 kilometers up to San Diego. There, as I said before, there were two land groups. The first land group had livestock, and that's what's going to change the environment in California. Livestock. Human beings have had livestock in the Euro-Asian continents for 10,000 years. The only livestock that in the New World were llamas or alpacas. This will be important when we start talking about disease, because most of the diseases that afflict human beings are zoonoses, and we'll take a look at that. So this is the New World's first exposure to livestock, and they are going to decimate not just the environment, but also the people who have no resistance to the zoonoses. In the first land group, Crespi, we'll hear about him over and over again, and he accompanied Fajas in the walk around the bay that took him through Martinez. So he's the diarist. He's also from Mallorca. And had been attracted to this expedition by the charisma of Junipero Serra. So here's Portola himself. One of my resources said he looked a lot like George Washington. I don't see that here, but and Serra himself. Nobody depicted him walking except the cartoon book I've showed and will show again. And Serra walked most of the way, but may have been given a mule when his leg ulcer started to fester. And his pal, Palu, who was also from Mallorca, and had agreed on Mallorca to come with Serra together to the New World, and had walked with him from Veracruz all the way to Mexico City, where Serra got the original bug bite that developed into an ulcer. He was in a mission just north of Loreto, and so it was Junipero Serra's first stop as he walked north. They finally get to San Diego. I'm going to skip ahead because we're reviewing. I've covered this once before, to start with, Sarah's festering leg wound slows them down, and then 2/3 of the native porters that they've commissioned go AWOL. And so this is the story. I think I've gone through this before about the leg wound. This is the muleteer, and he has a balm, and bag balm is a product, a veterinary product now used in animals for skin problems. And Serra asked him to give him some bag balm, and by the mythology is that it cured him, and so off they went up the Baja Peninsula. The key place, since it's hard to see the numbers, and I'm sorry for that, but La Paz, Loreto. But Velicata was the furthest north mission. North of this is all kind of arid desert, and there wasn't going to be much of a civilized basis for towns or missions there, just hunter gatherers. So this is the map. This is more schematic, and what the mission was at the very beginning when they met at San Blas is what you guys are going to do is extend El Camino Real, extend it way north, and so El Camino Real rolls off our tongues pretty rapidly. But this was the sketch and the idea. Now, this map says San Francisco. That wasn't a destination at all because they didn't know it existed. All they knew from the expedition in 1605 by Vizcano was San Diego and Monterey, and they thought Monterey was as far as they could get, the last stop in Alta, California.
Full time?
So off.
3 minutes to bridge. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Did they lose, how many men walking? Did they lose more people on the boats than they did walking?
Yes,
Yes, yeah.
they did. And I don't know if it's the water or what, but they did have desert to traverse. Yeah. But yeah, no, it was the sailors. So the first of two parties, they were the ones that had the cattle, and oh geez, what did I just do? I just did something pretty bad. I can't see.
We can see it. It's up there.
But I can't see it.
Oh, well, you can read it. Oh, they.
I got it back. So sorry. So 50 men in the first party, half of them were mounted. They were the security, the so-called leather jackets. So they had the leather vests that were so solid that it could repel anything, any arrows that the natives could fire at this point in history. They had some assimilated Native Americans, the Cochimee, who were in charge of the pack mules, and the Kumeyaay, who were the less civilized, if you will. I know that's a loaded term. Native Americans, they could see the dust before they that was the first sign that something was going to go very wrong, as the cattle were raising the dust and bringing with them the seeds that would destroy the indigenous way of life, literally seeds, because they had in their digestive tract seeds of plants from Europe. And we see many of those plants just by looking out our window into the open space here. Crespi wrote in his diary that the Kumeyaay attacked and they shouted at us in a loud chorus, trying to scare them off, I guess much like the Scotsmen used bagpipes. And they followed the caravan, they followed the dust, harassing them the whole way. This is where the Cochimee were from, the middle of Baja. The Parakew at the very bottom, who were first exposed, they were the ones that led the revolt of the 1730s that killed so many Jesuit missionaries. They reach finally the border. It was all strange, unexplored territory. But then eventually they get into a different climate. The greenery takes over. San Diego's not like this on the coast, but inland, where they have more water flowing, it is. The idea in this panel is that the original philosophy was to try to befriend the Native Americans because they could help establish towns that the Spaniards could inhabit that would get in the way of Russians coming south. And the first land party gets there and they look down at San Diego Harbor, and both ships are there. Hooray, everything's great. But then they were harassed by the Kumeyaay even more the closer they got. And here you see a picture of them shooting at the leather jackets, Portola's soldiers, and the arrows not doing much. And this is from a book I'm going to show you in just a second, a photo taken 100 years later of local Kumeyaay. And where did I see this? In a recent visit to my hometown in Solana Beach, my neighbor gave me this book. and the neighbor in San Diego, about how Solana Beach got water, and this is from damming an inland creek. So there are rivers just west of east of San Diego. And this is Solana Beach is 23 miles from Dead Man's Point, so it's not that far away. Okay, so Serra gets there finally. He's in the second party, and he's caught up to Portola, who's leading the second party. The first land party's already there with the animals, and he sees the two ships, and he thinks everything's okay, no problems whatsoever. And this is a good place to stop. Reality. 38 more sailors would soon be dead. 30 were hospitalized in that tent on the beach. The ship's doctor was sick and went insane. Of the 300 soldiers and sailors that started, only half made it to San Diego. Most of the casualties were on the ships. And half of the survivors were hospitalized for months. The Native American porters that had died, a lot of them deserted, so they only had about 20% of the porters they were counting on. Of the two ships, sailors, only 8 were fit survivors. And when everybody was there, Portola said, geez, what a mess. We need more supplies. The third ship, they didn't know the third ship was destroyed and would never be seen again. But he made the decision to send all the fit sailors, but 2 to take care of the remaining ship. He sent them all back to San Blas for resupplies. And the amount of time that it takes them to get to San Blas and come back is a suspenseful tale that is resolved in the most dramatic way possible. And that is what I'll save for next week. Was that dramatic enough a conclusion?
Pretty good.
All right. So comments, questions, and yeah, so I'll just throw it open.
I have a question. How many years were the Spanish in Mexico before they started to go up to San Diego? And then that cattle that they brought up to San Diego must have grown in Mexico rather than in Spain, right?
Right. So the original herd started coming in after Cortez conquered in 1519. So yeah, subtract 1519 from 1769, and that's your answer. A lot of the livestock had actually been grown and herded by the Jesuit missions in northern Mexico on the mainland, certainly not in Baja. And that's what Father Kino did so well. In the Spanish sense of reestablishing Spanish agriculture, but so destructively when it came to Native Americans.
So Mexico was pretty decimated by that as much as we were.
Yeah,
well, to see what happened.
Yeah.
Think.
Well, and here's in that vein. The Jesuits had seen that 90% of the Native American population had died as a result of being exposed. And probably most of that was disease. That sounds like a big number, but if you go to the Native American Museum in Washington, D.C., and when they say American, they mean North and South America. And you look at the statistic that they came up with, you and I went there, they verify 90% of the native population died from disease. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about why that is, and it has to do with the factors behind why Europeans had livestock and the New World didn't. It's an interesting topic. Jared Diamond dove into it originally. That's the
hypocritical of Serra to go and convert the natives if he knew they died with exposure from the Europeans.
Yeah, and they knew there was something. They didn't know what it was.
Yeah, but I mean,
and maybe they thought it was the devil, and they would beat the devil for the surviving 10%. I mean, who knows? They're dealing with an invisible enemy with the bacteria. So. Okay, other questions? So just a thought. I'd invite comments. You don't have to make them verbally right now, but just it's almost been a joke how long we've been away from Junipero Serra, and I felt a little bit guilty about that. But with the world the way it is, I've had some positive feedback from one of you that the way we're going is fine. That you respond to events as they presented themselves to you. I don't want to do pending events that are acting out real time. Ramsey never did, and I think that was wise. Allow whatever changes are afoot to have some maturity. But then at some reasonable point, look at the history of, arbitrarily, I'd say in my lifetime, at least, and, obviously going back a little bit further, but focusing on that as needed, and not doing a comprehensive deep dive. That's above my pay grade. Ramsey can do that better than I. But to take get a reasonable amount of history, looking on a very arbitrary definition of human interest, and kind of doing the same thing with the history of California. I'm not going to just saying to myself, this doesn't have to be comprehensive. Focus on the interesting stuff. And, my favorite book on the history of California is James Rawls, and he's entitled his book Interpretations. And I never knew what that meant, but I do now, trying to teach it. You can't teach everything, and at best, I'm going to just interpret some stuff. So that's a kind of a hybrid approach to this that I've been taking, but I'm open to changing emphasis and hearing what you all have to say.
John, I think it's great, David. I was looking at last week's notes. You went over Ukraine and the history and the social progress index, the 52 indicators, the well-being, the U.S. president's. I feel like this is my weekly upgrade on, the world, but not just like right now, a historical look. So I really appreciate it. And I think bringing California in so we really understand my home state is wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, but feel free to write me.
I do.
As it happens, I've just read a very good book on the exploration of the Pacific by Europeans 20 years before Serra. The book is called The Wager. It's by David Gran. He wrote Killers of the Flower Moon as well. But it's an English attempt to, this is during the War of Jenkins' Ear, a Spanish-English war, 1740 or so, when they sent ships around the Cape to try to capture Spanish treasure. And how the same things, John, shipwrecks, typhus, Native American hostility, the inability of Europeans to survive if disconnected from European foods, and Native Americans succoring them to their great costs.
Yeah.
So it's another fine book. It's only 20 years before Serra settles in San Diego, but it involves a war as well as all the other plagues that Europeans confronted.
And what was the name of it again?
The Wager, the bet.
Okay. Yeah, Jenkins' Ear, the War of Jenkins' Ear. We were exposed to that when we were in Cartagena. There was a big battle in Cartagena again in the 1740 that involved George Washington's brother Lawrence, who was in the British Navy, and he had smallpox, which was one reason that George Washington was sensitized to the danger of smallpox in soldiering. And when they went down in Valley Forge, George Washington had the troops not immunized because they didn't know about cowpox, but what did they call it? Vesicularized or something like that, where they actually took live smallpox and put it in the arm, hoping that the immune system would respond to the smallpox just from a nick in the arm quicker than the smallpox would develop into a systemic infection. Vacuolization maybe seems right. And if you saw the it was on PBS, the John Adams, that series. Abigail vacuolized 5 of her children, and it goes well 85% of the time. And statistically adherent, it shows Abigail having to nurse one of her kids that was on death's door from maybe it's virilization. Yes, Jim.
Variolate.
Yeah, thank you. That and the Chinese had tumbled to this in the 1400s, and it was brought to England in like 1715 by a British aristocrat who was traveling in Istanbul, and she saw it being practiced, and she said, "Where did this come from?" and was told, "Oh, the Chinese introduced this." Bob, Jim,
Well,
Jim's first.
interesting side story. Benjamin Franklin believed in variolation and had a son. I'll tie this to current events. had a son who he wanted variolated, but his wife was quite religious and persuaded him not to variolate his son, who then died of smallpox.
Oh, wow. Yeah, Bob.
Well, my question is for all the physicians present. What is the difference between variolation and vaccination? Because after all, the word vaccination comes from the Latin vacca for cow, right?
Well, so a vaccination is from the cow variole. Variolation is from the human smallpox lesion.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and this was all thanks to an observant general practitioner, Jim David, who practiced at the foot of Berkeley Castle, not Berkeley Castle, Berkeley Castle, which is spelled exactly the same way, on the near Bristol. On what's the river that goes through Bristol? Anyway, he practiced at
River Severn.
yes, not far from the Severn, and Aiko and I visited the Berkeley Castle. Boy, oh boy, that I could talk another hour about that. It involved the awful death of Edward II, who was murdered there. But it was Jenner who practiced at the base of the castle that just made the observation that cow maids never got smallpox, and had the audacity to report it. So, yeah, Bob, another comment or?
Oh, my hand stayed up for no good reason, but back to Jenkins' ear and the wager and landing Europeans trying to get around Cape Horn. The wager is the name of the ship, of course, and it's as Homer said, it's a terrific book. And I've just gotten hold of a book from 30 years ago of the same voyage of the 5 ships, of which the wager was one. The leading ship, I'm not sure in nautical terms what you call the leading ship. Anyway, it was the Centurion. I've got hold of from a friend a book published 20 or 30 years ago, which is based word for word almost on the log of the Centurion, written in 1760 or so.
Yeah, I think we call that the flagship.
The flagship. Thank you. Yeah,
that's right. And then Anson was the captain who,
yes,
amazingly, with all the other ships lost and half his crew dead of scurvy, manages to overtake a Spanish galleon and makes a fortune.
They were off on the way to the Philippines, because at that point, we've done this history, I know, with John already. Manila was the huge port where the Spanish gold would arrive to trade. Jenkins' ear was a pathetic excuse for a war, if you read about it. It was raised in Parliament. One of the MPs purportedly raised the Jenkins' ear in Parliament, said, "We've got to get revenge on the Spanish."
Oh, that's great. Yeah, Jim.
I think the flagship is the main ship. The leading ship I just looked up is called the capital ship in a flotilla. So
that's the leader, but the flag has the commanding officer, no?
Well, yes, but it's not the leading ship. I mean, it's not the first. It's like a scout. I thought you were talking about the leading as being first in line.
I thought he meant leading in the sense of it had the commander aboard. But
okay, we have a different definition.
Yes, but now we come to an understanding.
There we go. A different understand. We understand each other.
So as
That's
long
real progress.
yeah, absolutely. As long as we're going around the Cape and talking about it, I'll give you a Johnny come lately story 2 years before the mast.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and I'll be talking about that, and maybe not next week, but the week after, and tell you how Dana Point got its name. And also about corporal punishment and the reform led by Richard Dana, the author, to get rid of it. So, other comments? Well, this has been a really lively discussion. Anyway, this is what I had in mind all along. So I'm really feeling good.
I think you guys need to send out your book lists earlier because I now have 3 books that I have to catch up on. And it's hard to keep up with you guys. Maybe you need to give book reports. I think the idea of the ear is disgusting though.
It was a squalid, and it was a squalid war. It greatly impoverished both countries, really. Awful.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you all. I'll see you all next week.
Thanks, John.
Thanks. That was great.
That was. Bye.